Sun-Venus combinations. This is always an interesting one to talk about because it's not necessarily as good as one might think. And why is that? That's because Sun and Venus are enemies to each other. When it comes down to it, they don't really support each other's agenda that well. And this is a difficult thing because we often see Sun and Venus combinations in a person's chart. And why is that? For the exact same reason that we find Sun-Mercury combinations in a person's chart rather frequently. Because Venus never gets too far from the Sun, because it's a planet between the Sun and the Earth. Mercury and Venus are planets between the Sun and the Earth, so they can't go into like a person's 4th house, 5th house, 6th house, 7th house, and so on. So if you see charts that are that way, be dubious about it. But anyway, Sun-Venus combinations, they're not necessarily the best combinations because they don't support each other's agenda. Now, having Venus with the Sun can help the Sun because Venus is a benefic. All right, so we got to remember that there's different ways of looking at these combinations. There's just the natural, malefic, benefic combinations, cruel and gentle combinations that speak for themselves. You've got Venus with the Sun. That's definitely going to help the Sun to feel good about himself. But when it comes to achieving the Sun's goals, Venus is going to get in the way. And this is classic starvation. Kshudita, that's a Kshudita Avashta. And what happens when we get Sun and Venus together? Well, the Sun is the king. The Sun is our inspiration, that thing that wants to accomplish its goals, its highest goals, its highest ideals. And Venus is the advisors. So in previous videos, we talked about how Mars is the general. Pardon me. Mars is the general of this army. So Mars and Sun do well together because the king likes to have a good general, and the general loves to have a good king. A general will follow a good king no matter where he goes, an honorable king no matter where he goes. A king will do whatever he can to help his general. But now when we get to Sun and Venus, we're getting more into politics. We're getting more into diplomacy. We're getting more into our advisors, because Venus is the advisor. And it's good to have good advisors if you're a king. But at the end of the day, it's the king who has to follow his own inspiration. This is an interesting thing because what happens when we get Sun and Venus together? Well, a person doesn't achieve their goals because they're too busy listening to their advisors in their life. And that can be anyone. That can be their friends. That can be their wife. That can actually be if you're a business owner, your advisors. And if you've got a great Sun, which means you know how to lead, you know which direction to go in, your intelligence is good, and you've got that Venus coming in, starving this Sun, well, the person's going to say, well, I know which way I'm supposed to go, but man, these people make a really good point here. And they'll end up following their advisors rather than at the end of the day making the choice they need to make to be successful, and then nothing really seems to happen. And how do we break this down on a very basic level? Well, think about people who are in relationships. And rather than get out of the relationship because they know it's the best thing for them, they know it's the good thing for them, they end up listening to their friends, listening to their family, and they stay in that miserable relationship because their advisors have convinced them of that. Think about the government. All right, now, democracy, I think, is a wonderful thing. But maybe if you pay attention to current politics, you'll see how people hardly ever get anything done in democracy, right? But if you had a good, solid king that you could trust, in the same way that you had a good, solid parent that knew what was best for you, instead of the parent saying, all right, children, tell me what you think I should do, the parent would say, no, this is what we need to do, so this is how we're moving forward. But if we would have a bad parent, if that parent said that to the children who had no experience, who really weren't able to see the bigger picture of what was going on, and the parent would make bad decisions. So when we're thinking about Sun and Venus, remember that it's good for a lot of things. It's good for being skillful, it's good for music, it's good for being an entertainer, it's good for having people like you, it's good for having that nice Venetian quality. But when it comes to accomplishing your goals, when we look at the Lajatati Avashtas, it hurts you because you're too busy paying attention to what other people think you should be doing rather than being the king of your own kingdom and doing what you need to do. So where are you going to find this trouble? You're going to find it in the house in which Sun and Venus fall in. The weaker the Sun by dignity and the stronger Venus by dignity, the worse this is going to be. If you've got a really strong Sun and an average Venus, or a Venus isn't able to overpower the Sun, well, that's good. And you learn this in the Lajatati Avashtas. That's good, because you have a person at the end of the day that will make the choice that is best for them, and they will listen to their advisors, but they're not going to be overrun by their advisors. They're not going to be they're not going to lose their sense of self due to the politics of things. And that's where Sun and Venus combination is a great politician. Usually speaking, we get a great politician there, especially if Venus is stronger. The problem with that is that Venus is also a planet that rules over things like luxuries, comfort within the world. And the Sun wants to accomplish its goals no matter what. Meaning, the Sun says, I don't care if I have to suffer to achieve this because it's for the greater good, I'm going to do it. But you get Venus involved here and saying, yeah, but don't you want to be comfortable while you do it? Wouldn't you like to get some extra money coming in? Maybe some lobbyists will help us out. So again, when we think about these Sun-Venus combinations, they're wonderful for politics. They're wonderful for musicians, for actors. They're wonderful for people in roles where luxury is important and artistic expression is important. But it's not so good for a leader who's meant to know what needs to be done and do it. So anarchists would hate, anarchists would actually love Sun-Venus people, I think. But anarchists typically don't like a strong Sun. Like here in Asheville, I've met a few of those because we have all kinds of different people. And the problem with anarchists or people of this nature is like they never can get anything done because they have to get a consensus every single time. I remember being in a band with a woman who was the anarchist, who's a total sweetheart. I love her to death. She had a beautiful voice, was a wonderful drummer. But anytime I tried to say, let's practice, let's do A, B, and C so that we can actually play out a little bit, the response would always seem to be like, you're just trying to be patriarchal and control everything. So it's a funny thing. Those kinds of things are extreme. Usually you got to have like a difficult Rahu or difficult Mars or Saturn or so on to make it that extreme. But Sun and Venus, wonderful for being charming, wonderful for the arts, wonderful for being a politician, wonderful for being an entertainer, for making people feel good about themselves, wonderful as a salesman. But the higher level things where you have to really get things done seriously, that Sun and Venus can hurt you quite a bit. So find out what house Sun and Venus is in. And if Venus is stronger than the Sun, that's going to be where you make bad decisions because you're too caught up in luxury or wanting to be comfortable or listening to what everyone else has to say or how people see you versus actually doing what's right. All right. So Venus rules over reproductive organs as well, and especially if Venus is combust, well, that can give difficulty with reproductive organs, and combust Venus can give difficulty with love in a person's life. If it's a male, it can give difficulty with a female spouse, and so on. But Sun and Venus, it's good for some things. It'll make a person attractive. It'll make a person persuasive. It'll make a person kind of enjoyable to be around. But when it comes down to doing what needs to be done to achieve one's goals, to be successful in life, Sun and Venus can be a bit of a difficult combination.